Hi everyone, welcome to AA Runnin'. In today's video, I'm going to tell you what you need to know to run a sub 90-minute half marathon. The first thing you need to know is that a sub 90-minute half marathon is a 6:52 per mile pace, or about 4:16 per kilometer. And so that's the pace you have to run under 90 minutes for a half marathon. In terms of the speed that you need at shorter distances, a sub 90-minute half marathon, according to Jack Daniels, is equivalent to about a 40:39 10K, 19:36 for 5K, and 5:44 for 1 mile. My advice is to focus on shorter distances until you're able to match one of these times. And so then when you eventually do focus on the half marathon, you're going to have a much better chance of being able to run sub 90 minutes. The next most important thing to realize about a sub 90-minute half marathon is that when you're talking about a race that is an hour and a half long, the primary challenge is stamina and endurance. The two most important things in your training is how consistent you are and how high your mileage is, so your training volume. And so when I talk about training volume, I mean not just your miles per week, but also your miles per year, right? And so having months and years of a mileage base behind you, really taking a long-term approach to your aerobic development. This is really going to pay dividends when you're trying to race a half marathon. Just as a general rule of thumb, I think most people are going to have a hard time racing to their full potential over a half marathon if they're running less than 50 miles a week, or about 80 kilometers per week. So if you're not up to about 50 miles a week yet, my advice would be to gradually increase your mileage. And so if you're running 30 miles a week right now, maybe try to increase that to 35 or 40 miles a week. After a few months, when you're feeling really comfortable at 40 miles a week, then try to bump that up towards 50 miles a week. And this is really going to put you in a good position to be able to race a half marathon and really focus on the speed that you have to run and not just struggle with the distance of the race. So in order to help you increase your mileage, one tip is to make sure that you're running your easy days slow enough. And so your easy pace, you want to make sure that you're not pushing your easy days too much and not giving your body a chance to recover and adapt to the training stimulus. And so just for specifics, a sub 90-minute half marathon runner or a 90-minute half marathon runner should do their easy pace at about 8:07 per mile or slower, or a little bit slower than 5 minutes per kilometer. And so it's a good idea to moderate your training intensity distribution. So basically how much time that you're spending per week running easy, running moderate, and running hard, right? And so you want to make sure that you're kind of holding to that 80-20 rule. And so 80% of your training time should be spent at low intensity. And so in other words, for a 90-minute half marathon, 80% of your run-in should be slower than 8:07 per mile pace. Another useful tip is to do a lot of what's called threshold training. So your body has what's called the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold, or LT1 and LT2, it's sometimes referred to in the physiology world. Basically, LT2, or your anaerobic threshold, this is what's commonly referred to as the lactic threshold. Just it's the threshold that has the bigger jump in your lactate levels. This is your 1 hour race pace, and then your LT1, or your aerobic threshold, is a bit slower than that. And so for comparison's sake, these are kind of like the Jack Daniels T pace, which would be your anaerobic threshold, and the Jack Daniels M pace, or marathon pace, which would be roughly around that first aerobic threshold. So for a sub 90-minute half marathon, your anaerobic threshold, or your 1 hour race pace needs to be around 6:44 per mile or 4:11 per kilometer. And so my advice is that early in the season, in base training, you want to focus on a lot more running around the aerobic threshold, or for a 90-minute half marathon runner, this would be something like between 7:15 and 7:30 pace per mile. And then later in the season, when you get into more specific training for the half marathon, you want to do a lot of running around threshold, which would be around 6:44 per mile. And so in doing so, if you can increase your lactic threshold, then you can run at a faster pace without having to rely on your anaerobic energy system. You can stay aerobic longer, have fewer byproducts being produced at that half marathon pace, and you're going to have a much easier time of making it 13.1 miles at that 6:52 per mile pace, right? Because that's going to be below your lactic threshold. Another thing to keep in mind is that you need to prepare your body not just to run 6:52 per mile pace, but you also have to prepare your body to be out there running for an hour and a half, right? So you need to prepare your body for the distance of the race as well. And so you want to make sure that you're including some form of a lawn run in your training, preferably building up that lawn run up to about 1 hour, 45 minutes to 2 hours, right? So running past that hour 30 mark and training your body to be on its feet, past an hour 30. It's going to make that half marathon race seem a little bit shorter. It's going to make your body a little bit more resilient and help prevent your body from having like muscle cramps and breaking down towards the end of that half marathon. So some general guidelines for the lawn run is that your lawn run should be no more than about 25% of your weekly mileage. And so, for example, if you are running 50 miles a week, then a 12 or 13 mile lawn run is probably the longest you should go. Now, you're going to be running slower than in your half marathon race, so this is going to be still quite a bit longer than an hour and a half, probably in that hour 45 to 2 hour range. Another thing to keep in mind is that the lawn run is a pretty big training stress. It's pretty big stress on your body, and so you should treat it like a workout day. And so no more than one lawn run per week. You might want to even consider doing one lawn run per 10 or per 14 days even. All right, so once you're comfortable with your overall mileage, and you've been increasing your mileage, and you're running 50 miles a week or so, you're doing some form of threshold training, some form of a lawn run in your training cycle. The next thing to consider is really including some key half marathon specific workouts. And so in the last 4 to 6 weeks before your race, you really want to be making sure that you're preparing your body for that stress of that half marathon and doing things that are going to feel quite similar, right? So some examples. Some examples would be just like a 4 or 5 or even 6 mile continuous run at half marathon pace or at 6:52 per mile pace. You can also do some longer repeats, like two or three times 3 miles or 2 times 4 miles at that 6:52 per mile half marathon pace. Something like 3 or 4 minutes rest in between those repeats. Another example would be to take your half marathon pace, that 6:52 per mile pace, and run alternations. And so do 400 faster, 400 slower, 400 faster, 400 slower. So something like for 6:52 per mile, that's around 143 per 400. So something like alternating between 98-second 400s and 148 second 400s. Or you can alternate kilometers. Do 1 kilometer faster, 1 kilometer slower. So again, like 1 kilometer around 4 flat, 1 kilometer around 430, and then just alternate. And you can do these alternations for, start off with 2 or 3 miles at a time and then build up towards, 5 or 6 miles. And that's really going to prepare your body for change in pace in a race. And if you do go out a little bit too fast, you're going to be able to recover. And so you're teaching your body to run relaxed at fast pace. And so the key really is going to be to make 6:52 per mile pace as comfortable as possible. And so you really want to practice running that pace, practice running a little bit faster and a little bit slower, and just try to find that feeling of relaxation at that pace. Our final tip is to make sure that you're doing plenty of running faster than half marathon pace as well, right? So you want to make sure that you're working on your running economy, trying to become more efficient at different running speeds. And the best way to do this is to do lots of fast running. So the first thing you should be doing is probably strides, something like 100 meters at mile pace with full recovery, and repeat that 3 or 4 times. You can do this, 2 or 3 days per week. Something like some 200 meter repeats at 3K pace or even 5K pace. You can do a set of 15 times 200 meters with 200 meter jog in between. And so I think the key takeaway here is that when you're working on your speed and your running economy, it doesn't have to be very like VO2 max intensive. You don't have to do lots of 600 or 800 meter repeats at 5K pace, a very short rest, and really just like go totally anaerobic. That's not really the point here. What you do want to do is you want to make 6:52 per mile pace comfortable, remember? So you're going to want to do lots of running at sub 6 minutes per mile, and do that in a relaxed fashion so you can train your body, train your body's skeletal muscular system and your neuromuscular system, and just be more comfortable running at fast speeds. So another useful thing to do when training for a half marathon is to make sure that you're including, some tune-up races in your build-up. And so in the final, 12 weeks before your half marathon, it's a good idea to do 2 or 3 5K races. And so do some running around that low 6-minute pace, and just become familiar with that pain and that burn of doing an all-out 5K. That's going to make half marathon pace feel quite comfortable in comparison. And so doing a couple of those tune-up races really is going to prepare you for that half marathon. In summary, running a sub 90-minute half marathon is an ambitious goal for many runners, but it's also quite achievable. The biggest takeaway of this video should be having weeks, months, or even years of consistent higher mileage under your belt, being consistent, being injury-free, stacking weeks and months on top of each other, being progressive, increasing your mileage gradually. These are really the most important things for running the fast half marathon, right? Because the half marathon, it's an endurance event, right? It's not so much about speed. It really is about stamina and endurance. And so the greater your aerobic development, the better prepared you're going to be for that race. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Drop a comment down below if you did. Make sure to like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more videos. Run energized.